We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, and I'm a partnerships manager at AllVoices. Our goal is to give you the tools to create a psychologically safe workplace. A lot of corporate employers are shifting to a hybrid approach or a fully remote workforce. So, what does it really mean when you can't have in-person happy hours, ping pong tables, and free meals for company culture? In this interview series, we're exploring how companies can proactively foster an inclusive environment by creating a psychologically safe space and a culture of feedback. We know that employees that don't feel heard and seen end up leaving companies, and this impacts everyone and the bottom line. The Society for Human Resource Management estimates the average cost to replace a salaried employee is 6 to 9 months of their salary. Here with us today, we have Coltrane Stansbury, VP of Diversity and Inclusion at MacMillan Learning. Hello, how are you?
Hi, Christina. How are you?
I'm good. Happy Friday.
Yes, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for taking time to interview me. I'm excited.
Yeah, of course. I'm excited too. Thank you so much for being a guest on our interview series here. I would love to just jump in. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're currently working on at MacMillan Learning, we can start there.
Sure. So, Coltrane Stansbury, as you said, VP of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at MacMillan Learning, and I'm in an exciting new role for the company. The company's been around for forever. The MacMillan itself is an incredibly older brand in publishing in the U.S. and the Western Hemisphere, and in its current iteration, MacMillan Learning is the arm of MacMillan that really manages and leads in education. So learning in high school and in college, arming professors and teachers with tools, applications, and platforms, as well as the content, to teach to the book and to create the learners and leaders of tomorrow. So I'm excited to be in the role. I've started my career in DEI probably about 20 years ago, not in corporate DEI, but mainly in supplier diversity, economic development for small minority and women businesses, and then transitioned to DEI work at corporate probably a little over 11 years ago. So I'm excited to be doing the latest iteration of that work at MacMillan Learning.
Yeah, absolutely, especially in education and with professors and teachers who are really, really important folks in a lot of people's lives. And I would love to know with all of your experience, what really motivated you to get into this kind of work in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I know earlier we were talking about some of your early teachers, but what really inspired that career move?
Yeah, I feel like I've always been in DEI, right? And as if I feel like the industry picked me. My story is I grew up in Trenton, New Jersey, majority minority city, small city, and in the middle of this hub between New York and Philadelphia. And so in the time that I grew up, my parents moved to Trenton to be public servants, and it's really started from the ground. Got their college educations, moved to a good neighborhood in Trenton. And at the time, the neighborhood was, before gentrification, was becoming integrated with white families who saw Trenton as a cheaper alternative to the more expensive Princeton, where most of them worked. But then also it became a middle-class hub for Blacks in Trenton who were moving to better neighborhoods, the neighborhood I lived in. And so the neighborhood that I grew up in, by the time I was a teenager, was very integrated with Black families and white families. And so by the age of 14, I'd already been 2 years into a private school experience, living in Trenton, going to school in Princeton, and now white families moving into the neighborhood. And so the questions around race, around ethnicity, around community, and how to create engagement with different people were all questions I was asking and answering for myself and for my family and for my community very early in life. And so I didn't start my career with curiosity. I really started it out of necessity to learn and to accept and to create collective perspective and value with other people. I think that led me to the early work I did in public service and consulting
Mm-hmm.
and working in government, and going eventually leaving Washington, D.C., going to Newark, New Jersey, New Jersey's largest municipality, one of the most diverse municipalities in the country, to help lead a community in despair, but bringing to bear resources from other communities and other people and other perspectives to do that. And so that work led me to Johnson and Johnson, where I spent about 9 years doing core diversity work, but really starting that work by helping Johnson Johnson build its first, at the time, legacy initiative in urban America. And so the early work that I'd done in Trenton, in New Jersey, with building communities, led me to help J&J build those same types of communities in places like Houston, Texas, Atlanta, Georgia, Philadelphia, Newark, New Jersey, and New York, around helping children own their own healthcare and their own health stories, engaged in classroom exercise, health content, health literacy, and empowering themselves as communities of learners early on, that would follow them for a lifetime. I'm proud of that work. Some of that early work at J&J in classrooms, building communities with teachers, educators, parents, and students, always stayed with me. And the curiosity of this intersection between technology and education carries over into the work that I'm doing today at MacMillan Learning. And I'm hoping to build on some of those earlier lessons as we do the same in terms of using the power of digital in order to affect and create community here in the US.
Absolutely. I love what you were talking about in terms of creating community, empowering the community that you serve as well, in terms of whether you're at Johnson & Johnson or MacMillan Learning. It's really tying the mission of the company to giving back to people, stakeholders, and really everybody in this holistic approach, which is amazing. And I appreciate you sharing, how you got into this work was really not out of curiosity, it was out of necessity, because it's not like you put on your DEI hat when you go into work and then you take it off after 5, 6. It's a lived experience, and it sounds more personal from you as well, coming from parents who are in public service. You have definitely had your experience as well, in government and public service as well. So I definitely appreciate that too. So I would love to know how, with those experiences, you define diversity, equity, and inclusion in a more corporate setting. We know that a lot of companies are hiring for these roles now. Maybe wasn't the case 20 years ago. So how do you think about defining that right now?
Yeah, it's interesting, Christina, you asked that question. I think, we all come out of a legacy of civil rights in the US. And out of the 60s and 70s, companies even then in the early 70s, IBM was one of the first to begin these processes of opening their doors to the possibilities of having any others besides white men become executives and be on the executive chain. So you saw executive management programs open up and accept women and accept people of color for the first time.
Love to
So I
see
say
it.
those are the first real experiments, or hiring experiments around DEI. And had the privilege in Trenton growing up to be a part of something called the Granville Academy, which was an extracurricular school, basically on weekends and Wednesdays for urban students, that was led by a gentleman named Bill Granville, who was a mobile executive, a Black mobile oil executive from Trenton, gang member growing up. He went to college, became a mobile oil executive, and was one of the first of that civil rights legacy to, at Mobil Oil, become a Black executive. He decided to take an early package and give back and start the Granville Academy and educate high schoolers in our city around science, STEM, and business, and brought to bear all of his Black book contacts from Wall Street, to teach us on Wednesdays and weekends. We rang the bell on the New York Stock Exchange. We went to the Black Engineers Award. I met Guy Bluford, the first Black astronaut in Baltimore at 15.
Amazing.
And I had a summer internship every summer from age 16 till I graduated from Hampton University from college. And so Bill Granville, I think I'm saying that to say that there's this necessity in DEI. This DEI is defined not just by this mindset that we want corporate America to be more sensitive and to be more inclusive, but it is a type of heart that we want diverse leaders to have around opportunity, that the opportunity that I've been given and that I've been able to achieve, the threading the needle, so to speak, the rare jewel who's been given this opportunity out of a civil rights era legacy of pain and sacrifice. There's this tremendous opportunity, but also a tremendous responsibility to give back with whatever resources we have. And so we don't wait to start ERGs, employee resource groups at our company. We are to do what the Bill Granvilles of the world did, and that is to mentor people where we are in our communities, connected to our houses of worship, in our neighborhoods, and to create sort of these underground islands of change and inspiration for the next generation. I think that is what turns corporate to know what to do next with DEI. And corporate America, it's not to say it's behind in this work. It just needs to continually be inspired in this work by people who, to your point, live the experience and have the deeper, natural, organic connections to those who want opportunity and need the change the most.
Absolutely. And I love that piece about opportunity and resources, right? Because it's about resources, it's about wanting to inspire others to do that internal work. You can't kind of do it for everybody, especially if there's not that kind of ground foundation of wanting to be intentional together. And I think that's really important, especially in corporate organizations too, when you're working with team members. So I would love to know, in terms of MacMillan Learning strategy for DEI, we were talking about this as well. How do you empower every member of your team to be a chief diversity officer, and not just come to Coltrane every time and say, well, he has all the answers. This is his role. This isn't my area. I don't know, or I'm not sure how to do this.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, it's a great question. I think, coming to MacMillan Learning, you can imagine there's this incredible expectation of what change would look like in having someone in the seat, so to speak. And I felt that, my first month on the job, there's a lot of excitement around my role. What I learned is that in publishing in general, and MacMillan Learning is no exception to this cultural sort of norm. The editorial process and the editorial teams sort of set the pace of the corporate culture, right? And the authors themselves who produce the content. That process of editorial sort of freedom and liberty to create, that creative process between authors and editors really dominates the culture of our company. And because of that, I found that the company is a very consensus-led company, and our processes really encourage a certain level of agility and nimbleness in that process, in the editorial process. It also means, though, that that culture of trust and trusted freedom hovers around a certain group of people at the company.
Right.
And in order to be more inclusive, because there are more than just editors and authors in our company, there are marketers and salespeople, HR folks, and IT practitioners. And we all need to be innovating and thinking about what our product of tomorrow, our platforms of tomorrow, our customer and client of tomorrow will look like, and how to ideate now and bring together all of the thought leadership and the inclusive thinking and the most innovative approaches to our work. And that means that we have to hire the right people at the right time, given our market wherewithal. But also with the folks that we already have, make sure that our employees have the right voice, not just to speak up when there's trouble, but that our teams have the right types of opportunities for people to whiteboard and use creative space up and down our corporate ladder, and create sort of lateral energy, I like to call it, for people to give input. Um, I think also what we're doing different from what we've done in years past is empower our employees through being a part of employee resource groups. So we have one in particular for African American employees, and as you can imagine, that grew out of the George Floyd incident that happened last year, and the momentum around addressing racial inequality in the country. But we want to expand into having ERGs representative of all of our employees, no matter how small the numbers are at our company. We believe that employee resource groups aren't clubs. And so it's more about, for all the diversity of individuals and perspectives and communities, we want to make sure that our company hears, understands, values, and contributes to the development and growth of those diverse communities. As we learn more about how to include those diverse communities, we need our employees to continue to mold and shape our viewpoint on what sensitivity really looks like.
Absolutely. You need that employee feedback, but also you just need it throughout the year as well as these kind of instances come up too. And also as world events are happening, especially right now while we are working from our homes. So it's kind of hard to separate, this is the workspace, this is the living space. You're literally bringing people into your homes every day on Zoom. And I thought it was interesting what you said about the marketing team. There's the diversity, equity, and inclusion team. There's the leaders. There's employees who just joined, yesterday. And it's on everyone really to think about this holistic approach. In your opinion and experience, how can companies really think about that kind of holistic strategy and evolving strategy around diversity, equity, and inclusion, as you mentioned, with suppliers, employee resource groups, internal, external, with community engagement? It sounds like a lot, but if you have the strategy similar to a product, you'll be able to do it. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think there's a couple key opportunities that all companies have. One I've already mentioned, which is employee resource groups. That's a really good opportunity to allow your naturally diverse communities to organize themselves around topics that matter the most to them, and to educate and inform and engage the general population through event opportunities, not just on the cultural awareness events that are natural to that group. So for African Americans, there's Black History Month, obviously Women's Heritage Month, and so on and so forth. But also to talk about key topics that are not related to those diversity calendar moments, such as racial injustice, for instance, pay equity. There's the intersectionality between race, culture, and gender, and how bringing data and insights and storytelling to those intersectional experiences, such as the immigrant experience, and how many different diverse perspectives and stories come out of the immigrant experience as it relates to corporate America, and how people are balancing time and life and lifestyle, and not just raising children, but caregiving to parents, and how they do that culturally, how different people in different experiences culturally are creating community and family and balancing that with work. These are things that our ERGs can work on. Also, diversity councils. A lot of companies have D&I councils that are constituted many different ways. Some are headed by their CEOs and presidents, others by their chief diversity officers. But I think best practices councils are best used to answer the 2 or 3 questions that year that can't be answered by ERGs, and it can't fully be tackled by your chief diversity officer. But that group of individuals, hopefully constituted by corporate executives and other leaders, can help block and tackle for the bigger challenging opportunities that the company is facing, such as how best to hire diverse talent, how the best to define business impact for the company for DEI, and how do we want to brand ourselves and engage and get involved in external DEI work? Who are the partners we want to work with to do this work? And what are the causes we want to stand for? And how best to bring our resources to bear to make those connections?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that brings up a good point too. I think a lot of companies over this past year have been talking about hiring diverse talent and hopefully promoting diverse talent as well, which we know is a key piece of that too throughout management and executive leadership, seeing that representation. I think a lot of folks, what we've been hearing as well is just we have this strategy. So you have this holistic approach, you are intentional about it, but kind of similar to marketing in a sense, how do you really measure it? For example, sales teams have goals that they need to hit, and it's really clear when they don't hit it, and it's really clear when they do. But for DEI, I don't know what your thoughts are on this in terms of measurement and what success really looks like authentically at a company. I know it would be different, but how do you recommend companies go about doing this to really, see if they hit those 2 to 3 goals in diversity councils, for example?
Yes. Yeah. Having goals that are measurable, right, ladders up to accountability. And I think it starts with good problem statements. DEI is really all about solving problems. It is not multiculturalism, which is about celebrating differences. Beyond multiculturalism, DEI is about problem solving. And so good problem statements are important. So we don't just hire because it's the right thing to do, hire diverse talent. We have to hire diverse talent because we understand the innovation that diverse perspectives bring to our businesses. And so a problem statement, for instance, is that our products aren't representative of the customers who we want to reach. So in publishing, for instance, it could be that our history books or our English books don't include a diverse perspective of writers and a diverse perspective survey of history. Mm-hmm. And so in order to write that and create a more inclusive narrative around history or different perspectives in writing, we need to hire more diverse talent for our editorial staff. We need to have a more diverse group of authors who we draw on for content, right? So we're starting with the problem statement around just not having the perspectives we need to drive the appetite for greater learnings for our customers, and then that creates reason to create measurable results, right? In that sense, the nominal measurement is actual the number of editors and and assistant editors that we hire or authors over time. Now we know some of those goals, like diversifying our authorship, takes time. It just takes time. It may take in creating interval and smaller goals over time to say, we want to hire eventually 3 more editors who are women or people of color, and we want to do that over a 2-year period, right? So you've got to think, does it make sense to say our goal is to do that, to do incremental hiring each year, or that we want to wait till 2 years to have reached that goal, right? It's all about learning and understanding how your market is receptive and what resources you have to actually reach those goals as well.
Absolutely. I like the idea of having that problem statement. And also it's not, diversity, equity, and inclusion is not multiculturalism. It's not just celebrating Heritage Month and Black History Month. There's the intersectionality piece as well that you talked about. So we need to talk about how all of these kind of ideas, celebrations, and these problems all meld together as well, and how we move forward. And it's not a nice to have because you want to hire diverse talent. It impacts the business and innovation. So I like that kind of perspective as well. I know we've been talking a lot about kind of from a company leadership perspective and management perspective from a strategy sense, but if you kind of go down the funnel to individual employees, what are your thoughts around like individual contributors and team members, really contributing to this inclusive, psychologically safe environment, whether it's in person or virtual, especially too, if you've never met people in person, how can they really foster that environment in a really intentional but authentic way?
Yes. So, this work is really about, grounded, right? We talked about historically grounded in the civil rights era, but personally is grounded in the social sciences. This is about studying human behavior and what it is for people to change. And so our work is really grounded in sociology, psychology, and just like in marketing for business, in politics, we're always trying to get people to vote differently, right? Or we're trying to get people to interact or engage at different levels, which is all about understanding human behavior. What motivates people to change and make choices? And DEI comes out of that legacy of social science. And so, so this is really about understanding what incentives do we create for people to change, right? Well, so what incentives do? So this is where you get the Googles of the world and Facebooks who have incredibly creative office spaces and interaction spaces that allow people brain breaks and to negotiate and communicate and connect on teams in ways that are psychologically safe and comfortable. And we know that doesn't just come out of bright ideas, that comes out of the science of what people, doing enough surveys and creating enough science around what motivates people to want to grow and contribute, down to the amount of minutes that a meeting is optimal, right? And what lighting in a room creates the best awareness and engagement, and what spaces and what temperatures in rooms keep people engaged for the most optimal amount of time. I think these are parts of the science of engagement that are important, as important as having diversity in race and gender and ethnicity and perspective, is how we incentivize people to stay engaged and feel creative, and where enlightened spaces actually are conducive to learning and contribution. I think, though, as we get a little deeper than what feels good, we get to the deeper motivations, which are people's values. And so we've got to create this alignment between personal value and corporate value. And the way to do that is to have very clearly articulated missions, values, and vision statements for the company. And so for MacMillan Learning, we are for education for all. And so there's this equity around how education can empower people to be contributors to society, to be leaders in society, and for your own personal empowerment to inspire others. And we utilize education as our tool to do that, right? And so so you come to MacMillan Learning not just because we pay well or because we've got a foosball table in most of our corporate offices, which are external incentives, but we want to appeal to the internal mission of individuals. We want you to come to MacMillan Learning to be a part of a process where we're launching rockets, right? We are creating tools that are meant to go further and drive education further than it's ever been before, right? And create more engagement and more empowerment worldwide and in communities than ever before. And that appeal is personal, and it's meant to arm all of our employees, no matter who you are, with this excitement and this incredible opportunity to stay committed to us, even during difficult times and change.
Absolutely. And I think that goes to what really company culture is today and what it's evolving to as well. When you can't offer those in-person things yet, or when you're thinking about kind of creating that intentional space, really driving home the values conversation. And that MacMillan Learning specifically is mission driven as well. It brings in, employees that are really empowered by that same mission, which is really great too. I want to also shift back to just companies engaging as well. And you mentioned just like education for all, which is really important. And a lot of companies have been engaging, especially over this past year, since last June with George Floyd's murder, corporate social justice, making statements and making statements of solidarity with employees, supporting their employees of color. We just had the recent kind of hate crime in Atlanta, and I've seen a lot of companies make statements, whether it's external or internal. Not sure what kind of conversations go on internally before that happens, but I would love to know what your thoughts are on what companies should be thinking about, or just kind of before making that statement in solidarity with, if they should look internally. I've also seen a little bit of backlash from employees that are at the company that don't feel like they're valued today. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, you are pushing on this conversation around authenticity and authentic voices. There's going to be no more authentic voice in a company than an employee's lived experience. And so companies need to have an always on listening device, tool, and platform for their employees to hear and to give rise to their voices and their experiences. So in the case of George Floyd, our employee resource group, African American Employee Resource Group, grew out of the company listening to our Black employees. We are hoping that as we start to experience not just more tragedy, but create more listening tools, more platforms, more events, that we will hear employees from all different perspectives speak up about their different experiences in areas that we just corporately don't hear and don't understand all the time. I mentioned the immigrant experience as one. There are many intersectional experiences, what it is to be transitioning, if you're transgender in the workplace, what it is to be to have a disability that's not visibly makes you visibly disabled. The neural diversity that's in our workforce, where people have dyslexia, for instance, but it's not detectable, but are every day overcoming 24-hour challenges of being me, whatever that might be. Companies need to continue to listen and hear and mine for those perspectives. And having these platforms to communicate, to engage, not just to bring in, $10,000 external speakers, but to allow all individuals to tell their story, either themselves or through others in their employee resource groups, is important, so that when these crises moments come up, the company is making a statement, yes, around our values, but is making those statements informed by perspectives their employees are already giving every day.
Absolutely. Maybe use the $10,000 for the employee resource group, and then listen to how they want to use it as well, whether it's a speaker, whether it's resources, and just carving out that space as well. Do you think it's important for the company to communicate that outwardly, that this is the work that they are doing, or it's just as important that they do the internal work and kind of listening to employees and sharing that like internal company culture?
I think it's a balance. I think if you do the first well, which is employee engagement, very well, you'll get a lot of organic credibility from your employees by sharing on social media, the good work the company is doing, by having your employees volunteer in communities, giving back to causes they care about. Organically, there's going to be credibility that comes out of that. There will be obviously opportunities for the company to use its big for good and to tout that work. Those should be few, opportunities that crop up every year. Most of the credibility in this space should come from employees being empowered, whether it be externally or internally, to build community, to talk about how excited they are to build community to others, and to engage in conversations on social media and through podcasts like this. How excited they are to be engaged and stay engaged, and to have the support of their bosses, leaders, and their company.
Absolutely. I think that's really important to highlight in terms of employee engagement and having a more proactive as opposed to reactive approach, and just creating that credibility when you do either put out a statement or you do send out an email to the company or on Slack, and just authentically saying and actively and empathetically listening 365 days a year is really important for folks who want to get into diversity, equity, and inclusion work in all of these roles that I mentioned kind of before, where companies are looking for someone to lead the charge. It is a full-time job. What advice do you have for them to get into it, especially when you are kind of a woman or a woman of color, or you are from a community of color? When you said, someone is coming in with this personal experience, it's very much blending into personal and professional life. And sometimes it can be really tough. So what advice do you have for them?
Yeah, so DEI is not a linear career path, right? It's not health. It's not being a physician, for instance, or law, or even accounting, where there is a linear career path based on a linear educational path, right? And having a terminal degree in a field. So practitioners come from all different walks of life, but also all different types of careers to begin with. So I like to think of it as two entry points. There's the entry level point, becoming a diversity analyst, right, as one of your first jobs, right? So as a young person, it always helps to have social science as a background. It helps to have history. It helps to have a liberal arts education. I say helps just as well as a business education. Anything that allows you to interact and understand the value of measuring human experiences, and the curiosity and the process of learning how to engage people is very important. So I think there are so there's that around kind of education coming in. I'd also say on the entry level, a lot of companies obviously have DI fitting squarely within their HR organization. So because of that, HR does have a tendency to sort of dominate the conversation of how DEI should be used within a company. So for integrating DI into talent acquisition, into talent management, into total rewards, into all of the different DEI spaces, training and development. It is important, obviously, but it's also important for DEI to be integrated into the businesses, not just a part of corporate functions and HR functions. So it also is helpful to come from the businesses or desire to go into the businesses. If you're in DEI, right? The DEI offices and teams really benefit from having business experience and people who have a business background even as well. Coming from marketing, where multicultural marketing is important for a company. It's very important, not just HR skills. And then also there's this second entry point, which I think is coming in the middle, which is where I came in as a senior diversity analyst at J&J. It is often a transition, to do this work when you're coming in, the senior analyst manager position. There's a lot of competition out there for those spots globally and nationally, because they're the ones who do all the work, right? Chief diversity officers lay out the strategy, but it's this senior analyst to manager roles, senior manager roles, that do all the heavy lifting. This is where you get all the experience, but this is also where all of the challenges are around building community. You are a functional leader, and so for the most part, you will not manage people. You will manage processes, and you will steward experiences. And so the skill set is being a collaborative leader, learning how to lead from the sidelines often, being a great negotiator and a listener, being able to be persistent with your ideas, helping people see the bigger picture, and building community inside of corporate. You are building community in a community and communities within your company, and doing that almost apolitically. You're doing it on the mission and the momentum and the excitement and the possibilities of what you can do, not necessarily because of who you know and because of boardroom politics. So you're armed with goodwill and great ideas, and it's good work to come in at those levels, either entry level or mid management. Chief diversity officers, there's a lot of turnover. On average, they stay maybe 2-3 years in a role. And so teams are built around these visions of leaders who are there, temporarily. So there's a lot of dynamics, a lot of change. You've got to steward change with changing leadership, with evolving corporate values, and with very dynamic annual goals. And you've got to do that and help the company ladder up to a sustainable plan year over year, with all of that turnover and all of those all that movement and all of those challenges. Very challenging role to be in, but it's exciting, and I think it's rewarding.
Absolutely. Good ideas can come from all different places. And it sounds like the experience you need at all of these different levels can come from a variety of places that deal with a collaborative mentality, looking at human behavior, like you said, and at the end of the day, problem solving, which I would argue could come from any department or, training, or just a passion for this work and a curiosity and personalized experience as well. So I think that's definitely helpful for folks who are looking to just maybe transition, like you said. It could be a career transition into diversity, equity, and inclusion work.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I want to, Christina, just address quickly, because I didn't fall on deaf ears about diverse talent being a part of DEI teams. You find that in our work, because it's been married to HR. HR traditionally are a lot of women in HR, white women in HR, and so as practitioners, we don't have a whole lot of people of color in this work who are leading in diversity, equity, inclusion, and that's not just Blacks. We're talking about not a lot of up and down from the Latinx community, the Asian community that are engaged in this work. I encourage people of color with varied experiences, personal experiences, and commitments to this work to get engaged. And that's not to spite any group who've been doing this work, white women in particular. It's not to in any way slight the work. It's just to mention the demographic lean within DEI and how we could benefit from having different diversity perspective, especially as it pertains to women of color in particular. Especially even if it's a Black man, there are not a lot of chief diversity officers or VPs of diversity and inclusion. And not that this is a numbers game or just about representation, but I do see as a trend over time, as we see more challenges, for instance, with how we deal with the Asian community, the Latinx community is growing in America. and the issues that we have around racial injustice in the Black community, a need to have more representation from those communities in our work.
Absolutely. Representation is really important across the board, whether it's hiring diverse talent, promoting diverse talent, but also from these leadership roles. That is very telling from a company perspective, but also from folks. It's not like they're not interested in these roles as well. So it's important to really highlight that as well. Is there anything else that you kind of wanted to share before I can't believe time went by again really quickly.
Yes. Yeah, I just wanted to, there's one of my favorite leaders is James Farmer. He's was a founder and head of CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, one of the major civil rights organizations, and a great friend of Dr. King. And he wrote a book called Lay Bare the Heart, his autobiography. In that book, he talks about a life committed to helping others. I think our work coming out of that civil rights era legacy is really all about a legacy of service. We are servant leaders in our roles in DEI, and our job is to turn our country, our communities, our society, our world toward the possibilities of change and growth through helping and leading others. That the more we give, the more we grow. And to do that at the backdrop of a very individualized, very self-serving set of messages that people are constantly bombarded with. It's refreshing to know that there are people, that there are roles, and there are responsibilities that we can take up in our corporate roles in DEI to propagate that message and to be a part of that legacy and to see the next generation inherit, I think, a better opportunity to face the challenges that we've faced in times past.
Absolutely. I think that is so true, and that's great. There are bright spots and people who are willing and are doing the good work, even if they are in the background and we don't always see them front and center. There are really good folks there. So Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Christina.
We really appreciate it. To our guest, Coltrane Stansbury, MacMillan Learning. You can reach out to him following this interview if you have any questions. But at AllVoices, we believe in the empowerment of employees to speak up. We know that creating a place where employees feel they can speak up is a need to have in order for everyone to succeed. Thanks, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.